The Final Horizon, the final DLC for Sonic Frontiers, released back in 2023, adding a new ending, or as they said it, new story, and new playable characters, taking place in an overhauled and much harder Ouranos Island, with towers reminiscent of the ones in Rhea Island, each ending with a Master Koco, each being a pilot for one of the 4 Titans, and they each give you a test. There are 4. Those tests aren't that memorable, except for the one where you have to parry a shell over and over. That one was fun. The final tower leads you to the Master King, who gives you the Master King's Trial. A trial that is quite widely considered to be one of the single hardest things in the entire franchise. It has also garnered quite the reputation for being absolutely abysmal, often referred to as unfair, poorly designed, or even requiring luck. But is the Master King's Trial really that bad? Well, I want to talk about that, and maybe some tips that may help you if you're struggling with the Master King's Trial. So before we get started, I would just like to ask you to like, comment, After completing all other trials, Sonic is able to climb up the final tower and access the Master King's Trial, which is required to face the final boss. Now, like the previous trials, this is a combat trial, having you face against the previous 3 boss fights, Giganto, Wyvern, and Knight, going through each of the fights in order, which that does include the climb up to the Chaos Emerald. However, of course, that is not all there is to this. Master King Koco's Trial has a few other effects. First of all your stats get set back to level 1, so you're going to be dealing less damage, you're naturally slower, you can only hold 400 rings, and taking damage makes you lose even more rings. The next stipulation is you cannot gain any rings in any way. You start with 400 and can only use said 400 to face all 3 Titans, with any way to get rings, such as the rings that normally spawn during Wyvern's fight or through Psy-looping, being removed. And since you do these fights as Super Sonic, you are constantly going to be losing rings whilst fighting the Titans. And you can also lose rings during the climbing phase. And since your defense stat is very low, getting hit in especially the Wyvern chase is practically a run-ender. Which, you know, those 2 conditions already make the fights harder, especially with how hazardous the Wyvern chase can be. But what makes this trial so infamous is not the fact all your stats are set back to level 1. It's not the fact you are stuck with only 400 rings. No. It's the new addition of the perfect parry. The perfect parry is probably the most hated thing about the Final Horizons DLC. But what is the perfect parry? Well, it's a parry. More of a parry than the game's actual parry, which, first, for those who don't know or don't remember, Sonic Frontiers parry was widely criticized for a while due to you not needing to time it. You could just hold down the button and the first thing that hit you would be parried. And while I don't think that ruins the parry, it does make things considerably easier, and also has some weird side effects. But come Final Horizons, and Sonic Team decided to correct that mistake with not just the perfect parry, they also made the parry itself naturally no longer infinite, now lasting almost 15 seconds. Which is still quite generous, though Final Horizons also lets you play as Sonic's friends. And their parries all have different timings, with Amy's being the most lenient at 3 seconds, Knuckles is 2 seconds, and Tails is 1 second. This is also assuming you're playing on hard, and the time you have to parry halves on extreme mode. But we will get back to this as we need to talk about the perfect parry. It's given to Sonic during Master King Koco's Trial to replace the normal parry, and it is not very lenient on the harder difficulties. It lasts for a surprisingly lenient 10 seconds on easy, then it plummets to 0.4 seconds on normal, and 0.266 seconds on hard, and 0.133 on extreme. And if you thought that wasn't very lenient, that is after they patched it, as when it first came out, it was even worse. Easy was only 1 second, which honestly makes more sense. Normal was 0.2 seconds, hard was 0.133, and extreme was 0.067. Yeah, quite challenging if you're on hard, extreme, or even normal. Now, is that a problem? No, not really. It's called the perfect parry for a reason. And in a vacuum, the perfect parry itself is perfectly fine. However, what isn't perfectly fine is how they introduce you to this mechanic. You see, normally when a game introduces you to a mechanic, they usually do it in a nice, simple way, something that doesn't punish you too hard for failing. Let's take a look at, say, the wall jump in Sonic Forces. I can't believe I'm using Sonic Forces as a good example, but oh well. Imperial Tower is the proper introduction of the Avatar's wall jump, and it starts you out with a nice, easy section to wall jump up. This section doesn't punish you too much if you don't do it properly the first time. Then it ramps up in difficulty by having you wall jump over a bottomless pit or while avoiding the sun's laser. It eases you into the mechanic before challenging how adept you've gotten at it. They don't really do that for the perfect parry. Or rather, yeah, they do try to introduce you to the perfect parry, but they have the complete wrong idea on how they should approach it. The Master King's trial is the tutorial for the perfect parry, meant to teach you how it works before the final fight against the end. I'm sure their thought process was that players have already fought these 3 bosses before, so they should know how to take care of them. They would just need to learn the proper timing on the bosses, mainly Wyvern's, attacks. But then that opens its way into another problem. That being that Sonic Frontiers wasn't built with that sort of precision in mind. You know, when a game has a parry mechanic, when do you think to use it? When your enemy's attack connects. As an example, let's look at Breath of the Wild. Oh look, a Lionel's charging at me. When do I parry? When its attack hits. What about this Bokoblin? When his attack hits. Lizalfos? Choo-Choo? It's all the same. You parry when the enemy's attack lands. But when do you parry in Sonic Frontiers? Well, let's look at Wyvern. When should I parry his slash? Well, if you said when his claw is a mile away from you, you would be correct. What about his slashes in his second phase? Well, it's a bit after his claw connects, and way before he hits you. This is a problem that persists throughout most of the trial, with the only things that work properly being projectiles, those being Wyvern's missiles and Knight's shield. You parry those as they hit you. I honestly think this is probably where the complaints of it requiring luck come from, as if you don't know, most of the animations don't line up with the attacks, and you try to eyeball when you should parry, most of the time you're not going to hit it, but may occasionally get the proper timing, probably without realizing why you hit it this time. It's honestly a really big problem that can't be easily fixed, and if you don't know this issue exists, this will become a much bigger issue. But at the very least, knowing about this does help. I was able to get past Wyvern much easier after I learned when you're actually supposed to parry. The perfect parry is the driving force as to why this is really difficult. Every issue that someone may have with this trial traces back to the perfect parry, except for specifically having to do the climb up to the boss fights. To do this trial, you have to get good at the perfect parry, but the game doesn't really give you a chance to get good at the perfect parry. The game doesn't even introduce the mechanic to you, just tells you perfect parry will be the only way to parry attacks. The fuck's a perfect parry? And on top of that, the game makes it very hard for you to learn the timings on the boss's attacks, as there isn't an easy way to train against the bosses. Island Rush mode takes too long, and I'm pretty sure the base game parry still inherently lasts more time than the perfect parry, even if you just tap it. Now I guess technically Giganto is really easy to train against, as he is the first boss in the trial, and his climb up is very quick. However, Giganto is the only boss that if you play optimally, you don't even end up parrying him a single time. Wyvern is very annoying to train against, as you need to get through the climb up to Giganto, the fight against Giganto, and the climb up this tower, and this absurdly long chase scene that you have to be very careful not to lose rings on. Because he is the final part of Master King Koco's trial, and you have to get through all you just did, plus the fight against Wyvern and the climb up to Knight. But really at this point your focus should just be on killing Knight and being done with this. So like I said, the perfect parry itself is fine, it's just there are way too big of problems surrounding it. But you know what? Let me do what no YouTuber, or at the very least very little YouTubers, have done before, and give you a proper guide on how to fight the Titans on hard mode. Okay, first off, let me just cover the 2 biggest pieces of advice you will get if you look up tips to deal with this trial. First, make sure auto combo is turned off. That is a pretty good piece of advice, as I'm pretty sure it halves your already low damage output. So just make sure that's turned off. Second, lower the difficulty to easy, which this is a guide for hard mode, so we are not doing that. But on the topic of changing the difficulty, Sonic Frontiers lets you change your difficulty settings at any point in time, which not only lets you have the more lenient parry by switching to easy, but doing that will also set your ring limit to 600 and your attack stat to 25, so doing the trial on easy is naturally pretty easy. However, you can change the difficulty during the trial, so you could, for example, do Giganto and Knight on hard, but switch to easy for Wyvern. But, however, as you should know, your stats are a bit different in easy mode. So what happens if you start in easy mode, then switch to hard mode? Well, you get to keep easy mode stats while having hard mode's parry. However, once you get past Giganto, the game corrects itself and gives you hard mode stats back. But hey, at least you should have a full 400 rings to fight Wyvern with. You can also do the inverse to have hard mode stats with easy mode's parry, but once again it corrects itself. Though you're still going to have the same number of rings you left Giganto with, but now you have the sentiment that you could carry up to 600 rings. I guess you could mess with the game a bit more by changing the difficulty again before fighting Wyvern, but I don't really see the point in that. But let's get on to the tips I would like to give on beating this trial, and this will be assuming you're playing on hard mode, but should also cover extreme mode. So starting with Giganto, this fight is pretty straightforward. You climb up him and get the Chaos Emerald, but once the fight starts, your first priority should be to Psy-Loop Giganto, as since your stats are set back to level 1, you naturally deal very little damage to the bosses. However, once you get them in a Psy-Loop, you deal much more damage, and your main way of dealing damage should be stomping the shit out of them. Once you get him halfway, you Psy-Loop him again to start the second phase. Now once the second phase starts, he is going to shoot a laser at you. Normally this forces you into a quick time event that will just waste rings, but during this animation, if you spam the dodge button and hold left or right, you should be able to dodge his laser beam, which you should then hit Giganto with a quick Psy-Loop, which in his second phase he will try to retaliate. Now you can parry it, but if you immediately parry then dodge away, you should be able to dodge his swipe, which I think it's actually faster than parrying him. So then just wail on him some more and that's Giganto. You should aim to beat him using at most 50 rings. Then we move on to Wyvern, who is honestly the hardest one to give tips for, as there aren't really any cool tricks you could do to make the fight easier like there are with Giganto and Knight. And with Giganto, the perfect parry is an option, but if you want to optimally defeat Wyvern, you need to perfect your skills at the perfect parry. Otherwise you are not doing this fight. Or at the very least not doing it with enough rings left for Knight. But the most I can really do here is try to help you with the timing. So first things first, you gotta climb up this tower, that's easy enough. Then you run on Wyvern's red carpet for a while to catch up to him. And you have to dodge a bunch of energy balls that can take quite a few rings if hit. So take it slow and avoid taking damage. Once you get to Wyvern, the fight begins and you first parry a missile. It's easy enough in the first phase. But then you have to parry Wyvern's swipe attack, which, like I said earlier, the swipe actually hits a bit earlier than the animation suggests, but there is another way to help you time it. You see, there is an audio cue. Try to hear it. It's the same timing every time. Try to hear it with the music. It also hits around 2.015 seconds after he starts turning. If you can get good at this timing, then the first phase should be easy enough, and once you start attacking Wyvern, you should try to quick Psy-Loop him as fast as possible to get the first phase out of the way. But if you are unable to do that, you'll quickly try to retaliate. Either try to parry that, unlike me, which it hits around 1.56 seconds after he breaks out. But you could bumble around for a few minutes trying to get used to the 1.40 perfect parry timing, but as long as you are decent at Knight, Wyvern is deceptively lenient. But try to Psy-Loop Wyvern and stomp him, and you should get to the next phase fast enough. You may be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of clutter on the screen, which is making it hard to pinpoint which missile is targeting you. But I do have a tip on how to deal with that. What I like trying to do is trying to focus on the area surrounding Sonic, as that makes it much easier to tell which missile is currently heading for Sonic. But here comes the hard part. Wyvern swipes at you twice in his second phase, and you have to hit both. Now the first swipe hits a little after his claw passes Sonic, and the sound effect is gone, making it harder this time. But I went through and it looks as if the attack hits around 1 second after he starts turning. And after that, he swipes again, which hits way earlier than you would think, and it hits 1.06 seconds after you parry the first swipe. If you are able to hit both, then you should be good to start attacking him, which do not attempt to side-loop Wyvern in his second phase. He will instantly break out and retaliate, so you should just wail on him before he retaliates anyways. This retaliation is different from the first phase, taking around 2.07 seconds to hit you, and just remember, he does not hit you on his first swirl. He likes to try and fake you out in his second phase. If you parry that, you should get the prompt to hit him with a Grand Slam. You shouldn't do that unless you're sure it'll take enough health, because right now you have to get him to a quarter of his health, so he starts his QTE segment. If you Grand Slam him and it's not enough, he'll try and retaliate afterwards. But after the QTE segment, start wailing on him some more and he should retaliate with this laser, which actually brings back the sound cue. It hits around 3.03 seconds after he breaks out. If you hit that, start wailing on him again and you should win the fight, as long as you hit all the QTEs. And you should hopefully win the fight with at least 100 rings left, as that should be enough to take down Knight. Finally, to start Knight's fight, we of course have to climb up him. I would say he is a bit challenging to climb up due to his spikes. Both his spinning and his hand will spawn spikes that you have to dodge. Though keep in mind, if you get hit by them, you could still parry before you hit the ground to keep yourself from losing rings. But once you get up, the fight starts. Just chase after Knight and beat him up. And I learned after the fact that the Sonic Boom attack is very good during this phase. It is also helpful to parry one of Knight's attacks, but not required. Eventually, he will hold up his shield, which usually leads to a long segment where you have to ram his shield back into him. But you can actually skip that by just dodging around his shield. But once again, side loop the Titan, stomp him, and move on to his second phase, where he throws his shield and you have to parry it back into him. But since it's a projectile, it's easy enough to parry, and if you're able to side loop him afterwards, the fight is pretty much over, as strangely enough, Knight doesn't try to retaliate in his second phase. All you have to do from here is make sure you hit the QTEs, and you're done. Congratulations, you beat Master King Koco's trial. And you know what, if I am being fully honest, if you're able to get good at the Master King's trial, then it's honestly more fun than fighting these bosses normally. Or at least that's just the opinion of someone who's done this several times. Once when it came out, once for a previous video, and many times for this one. But still, it's very hard to get good at this trial due to the fact that they don't introduce you to the perfect parry, and it's so hard to learn the timing of the attacks when the animations don't line up. But I do have a couple ideas on how they could improve the Master King's trial. Okay, first of all, I am not actually changing a thing about the trial itself, just the things surrounding the trial to make it fairer. The perfect parry needs a proper introduction, which, like I said earlier, Sega most likely thought Master King Koco's trial itself would be the tutorial. But the problem with that is you should not introduce a new mechanic in a test of skill, especially one that can be this hard. Now I have a couple ideas as to how they could properly introduce it. Which first, what they definitely should have done is make the previous 4 trials also have you use the perfect parry. All of those benefit greatly from the use of the parry. It's required for the Tiger's trial, makes the Snake's trial much more manageable, and I don't know why you wouldn't use it during the Dragon and Crane's trial. That will at least let you learn the perfect parry before the trial. Though I guess that still has the problem of introducing a new mechanic in a test of skill. So another thing they could have done is go the full mile. They already shortened his parry in Final Horizons. They could have just gave you the perfect parry from the start, explain it as Sonic cyber corruption causing him to not be able to parry for that long, which doing that would even work well with Sonic's friends' parries, being less and less lenient up until you would get to Sonic and find his parry is very precise now. Final Horizons is supposed to be more difficult anyways, and this would be a great opportunity to introduce players to the perfect parry before testing their abilities with it. So that fixes one problem, but then we have the issue of the animations not lining up with the attacks, which reasonably can't really be fixed without them reanimating every Titan, which is a bit much to ask for. Instead, what they could do to help with that problem is allow you to train against the Titans easier. Is to take the Master King's trial you all know and most likely loathe, and move it to the post-game. Make it no longer required to fight the final boss, and replace it with 3 separate trials, one for each Titan. Same rules, the only difference is your rings would reset between each fight, and after the fact you could replay whichever one you want, whenever you want, without having to worry about the others. So before doing the final trial, you would be able to train against whatever Titan you want without having to go through the full trial. This mostly would just help with Wyvern and especially Knight, allowing you to learn the timings of their attacks and some tricks to deal with them, before attempting the full trial. That's about all there is to the Master King's trial. So does the Master King's trial deserve its reputation? Yeah, it kinda does. The trial itself is honestly not that bad, but like I said about the perfect parry, it's only good in a vacuum. It's just there are way too many issues surrounding the trial. The perfect parry isn't properly introduced to you. It's hard to parry mainly Wyvern because their animations don't line up with their attacks, and due to how the trial is set up, it's hard to learn how to optimally fight Wyvern and Knight. But if you do learn it, I honestly think it's pretty enjoyable on the harder difficulties. And I hope my tips were able to help you if you've been struggling with this trial. But for now, I'll play with you some other time.